The Arab Spring was a series of pro-democracy uprisings that took place across several Arab countries in North Africa and the Middle East in the early 2010s. The uprisings were sparked by a combination of factors, including economic hardship, political corruption, and a lack of political freedom and human rights. The Arab Spring protests began in Tunisia in December 2010, after a young street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in protest against the police confiscation of his produce. Bouazizi's death sparked widespread anger and protests, which quickly grew in size and intensity. The protests in Tunisia soon spread to other countries in the region, including Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Syria. In each of these countries, protesters called for greater political freedom, an end to corruption, and more democratic governments. The Arab Spring uprisings were notable for their use of social media and other forms of digital communication to mobilize protesters and share information. The protests were often organized spontaneously and without clear leadership, making them difficult for governments to suppress. The outcomes of the Arab Spring varied from country to country. In some cases, such as Tunisia, the protests led to significant political reforms and the establishment of more democratic governments. In other cases, such as Libya and Syria, the uprisings led to violent conflicts and civil wars. Overall, the Arab Spring had a significant impact on the politics of the region, sparking discussions and debates about democracy, human rights, and political reform. However, the aftermath of the uprisings has also been marked by ongoing conflict, instability, and uncertainty in many countries. The Arab Spring was a significant event in the history of the Middle East and North Africa, as it marked a period of profound political and social change in the region. The uprisings were driven by a wide range of factors, including economic hardship, political corruption, and a lack of political freedom and human rights. In Tunisia, the protests led to the fall of the country's longtime dictator, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, and the establishment of a more democratic government. The country's new constitution guarantees civil liberties and human rights, and Tunisia has been held up as an example of a successful democratic transition. In Egypt, the protests led to the ouster of President Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled the country for nearly 30 years. However, the subsequent government led by the Muslim Brotherhood was short-lived and was itself overthrown in a military coup. Egypt has since been ruled by military-backed governments, and political freedom remains limited. In Libya, the protests led to a civil war that eventually resulted in the overthrow and death of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. However, the country has been plagued by ongoing violence and instability since Gaddafi's downfall. In Yemen, the protests led to the resignation of President Ali Abdullah Saleh, but the country has since been torn apart by a civil war that has resulted in widespread humanitarian suffering. In Syria, the protests against President Bashar al-Assad's government quickly turned into a violent civil war that has now been raging for more than a decade. The conflict has led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and has forced millions of others to flee their homes. Overall, while the Arab Spring brought about significant changes in some countries, it also led to ongoing conflict and instability in others. The uprisings highlighted the need for political and economic reform in the region and sparked important discussions about democracy, human rights, and social justice. However, the aftermath of the uprisings also serves as a reminder of the challenges of political transition and the complexities of social change.